Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. And this is an episode we've been excited to do for some time. And we were bombarded with insane technical audio issues that were definitely outside of our control. They had to do with the platform that we use and our guests' connection. And sometimes it gets frustrating when these things happen and people don't know what platform we're using and they start trying to chime in. I guess it's helpful when people are trying to be helpful, but sometimes being helpful is asking if you really know how this stuff works from a technical standpoint, what platform are you using? And then you troubleshoot from there, opposed to just yelling out via a chat your solutions that don't necessarily work. But we were able to get some good audio out of it, and we didn't say this on the main show, but Pascal and I are in the middle of doing a deal with the Real News Network where we are going to provide them with one show a month. So it won't be like we were doing with Zero Books, where we gave Zero Books an older show, or towards the end when they were running a simulcast with our Tuesday show. This is going to be something totally independent, an extra show for us a month to do that will run from 45 minutes to an hour. Because the Real News has kind of a wider net for guests that it's harder for us to come by. It's going to be a little different, because we'll have maybe higher profile people to start. And we're definitely bringing Adolph on for our Real News venture. And we definitely have troubleshot these audio problems that we had in the episode you're going to hear. I'm going to try to add out as much as I can, and still make it coherent. But ultimately, it was a great show. I mean, Adolph always has these very interesting thought bombs, I call them, that he drops. And he wrote a piece in August called "The Whole World is the Reichstag." And it's definitely talking about the authoritarian tendencies in the far right, the lust for power in the far right. It's basically a deep dive on what Pascal and I call the 50-plus year counter-revolution that starts in 1968, the year that Pascal was born. And if you are a patron of the show and you turned on the After Hours segment, we definitely took a very, very deep dive into the subject and Adolph's piece. Wherever you're listening to the show, there should be links in the description to Adolph's piece on Non-Site. The Whole World is the Reichstag. I made a good clip using, I found some Reichstag footage. If you want to see these clips, there's only one place to see them, and that is YouTube. There's a whole playlist we have on our YouTube page of all the show intro clips. And if you just go to youtube.com/This Is Revolution Podcast, you can go through all the clips on the playlist. Also, if you want to watch the show and comment in real time, the best place to do it is YouTube as well. Every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. and Saturday, or 6 p.m. Pacific time, and Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And none of that is changing for the move. Also, we talk about on the show, I believe, that the show is going to be taking place at a different location. Finally leaving California. Going to be doing it out of my new home in Mexico. So excited for that. So if you want to hear the patron-only bonus half of the show, you have to become a patron. It's simple. It's easy. We try to make it as inexpensive as possible. If you have the means and you feel so inclined and you want to help and see the show grow, patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. So there's a lot of great stuff coming up. Once this move happens, more patron-only content we're producing. But let me know what you think about this conversation we're having about, is the whole world the Reichstag? Because a lot of time on discourse you hear in left media, it's a lot of Democrats bad. And while we all agree that the Democrats are bad, we can't ignore what we're seeing with the power grab of the GOP. Especially on a local grassroots level. Taking over school boards and precinct officers. On that note, I've talked too long. Thank you for your time. Wherever you're listening to the show, please subscribe, share it with your people, and I am out. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. We have a very, very interesting show today. We have one of our favorite show guests, the elder Reed, Adolph Reed Jr., be coming in very, very shortly, where we are going to talk to him about a recent piece he wrote called "The Whole World is the Reichstag" for Non-Site some time ago. But before we bring in Professor Reed, before we even play the intro clip that's going to get you primed and ready for today's episode, let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. You know him as the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat.
Pascal.
Peace and greetings. Yes. Peace and
You can hear
greetings to the audience. And peace and greetings just in my. I can hear you quite fine.
I'll tell this to the audience. So if you guys want to know why I'm here, I'm having some technical issues on my end because so many people are watching the show. I think it has something to do with the stream itself. That happens. So that's always a good thing. We are cross-streaming on a few different channels. So are you ready for today's episode, Pascal? Do you have your questions ready?
Ready to rock and roll, brother.
I will say I missed the days of you emailing me a scroll of questions that you would have for the guests. I missed those days. So now it's always a surprise whenever we have a show like this.
I try to be a little bit more smart.
I'm trying to be like you, and I'm writing my long form Pascal-esque questions beforehand so you can look them over. Were they suitable?
Socially acceptable.
Well, let's put the clip to get you guys ready for today's show. I was actually able to find some footage of the Reichstag fire and an old World War II U.S. propaganda film clip. So here it is.
Führer number 3. Slogan number 3. Today, Germany is ours. Tomorrow, the whole world. And the tender, repentant, sorry German people carried the torch of their culture to Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, England, Norway, Holland, Denmark, Belgium, Luxembourg, Russia, Yugoslavia, Greece, and the United States of America.
This Lewis Powell memo of 1971 said, and here's Lewis Powell, political power is necessary, that such power must be assiduously cultivated, and that when necessary, it must be used aggressively and with determination. This was the beginning of the infrastructure of the modern conservative movement. Out of this came the modern conservative movement. And 2 years later, Richard Nixon appointed Lewis Powell to the U.S. Supreme Court, which leads us right to the Citizens United decision of January of this last year, where the U.S. Supreme Court had the pinnacle, the top of Lewis Powell's, the ultimate dream of Lewis Powell's, that corporations had rights under the Constitution just like people and could influence politics.
An article published in August 2021, Professor Adolph Reed warned that it's time to be blunt. The right-wing political alliance anchored by the Republican Party and Trumpism coheres around a single concrete objective, taking absolute power in the U.S. as soon as and as definitely as possible. And they're more than ready, even seemingly want to destroy the social fabric of the country to do so. In the article entitled "The Whole Country is the Reichstag," Reed drew parallels between the constellation of political forces in present-day America and those that shaped the affairs of Germany in the early 1930s. Are such comparisons legitimate? If so, what are the political implications of such an interpretation of our present-day situation? And what are the chances that the left can halt this authoritarian slide? We ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Excuse me, Dick. Ronald
Ronald Reagan is about to make his acceptance speech. Presumably, he's at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. Here is Ronald Reagan coming out at the Century Plaza. He was congratulated by President Carter about 10 minutes to 7 California time. Back now to NBC News.
You know, here we are. This is... They're all here but one now, and he was here, but they just took him off stage. It's way past his bedtime. But let me just say first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life. I would have been not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight, even if it had been the cliffhanger that all of us, I think, were expecting, it would have been the same way, but just to have had the support of the people of this country. I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith.
Thank you. Your way out. You can catch the live stream of This Is Revolution every Tuesday
Can you hear that still,
through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Pascal?
And
yes. Sorry. I'm having there's a bunch of issues with this. So let's bring in our guest, Professor Adolph Reed.
All right, Adolph, I guess Jason just introduced you and signed you out. Adolph, thank you for coming back to us. Doing all right, man. Thank you for coming back to our show. I know you've been sending.
Sure, happy to do it.
You're doing all right, man. Sending emails back and forth to each other. First of all, I want to say this early advertising. Congratulations on your new book coming out. And at some point, a little on down the line, and I will ask you to tell us what it's about if we have some time, if that's not a problem with you. Are you all right with that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Adolph, you wrote your piece that came out a couple of weeks ago in Non-Site, which is a great place for people I suggest to go to get great left content. I think it's nonsite.org, called The Whole Country is a Reichstag. Obviously with a metaphor to the rise of Nazi Germany. Can you possibly give us the purpose of the metaphor you're trying to create, and why exactly you think that metaphor is appropriate to the current political moment?
Sure. Well, let me say first of all, and it's not like back away from me. People do this, of course, on the analogy to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's not exactly the point. Too many people on the left tend to do that. But I mean, the forces that have condensed around, the Republican Party increasingly over the last half century. Committed to implementing an authoritarian government on the U.S. They not only don't have any commitment, like the democratic institutions, that they're actually hostile to them, and want to get rid of them, right? And as I argue in the article, of the polity to being on the White House, right? Just on the outskirts of the, and since in between George and now, but especially since Trump, they've come even far in from the margins, and Republican Party, like from the time, for instance, McConnell indicated that the Republican Congress, that the Democrats in the administration couldn't get anything done, couldn't. I already said that they have.
And if we're having some problems with your connection, is there anything you can do about that? It's kind of choppy.
That's what do you suggest?
Are you connected to an Ethernet cable, or are you using Wi-Fi directly? Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, yeah.
Yeah, for some reason your internet is kind of choppy for some reason.
Huh.
Do you think do you think it would be better if you logged in and logged back out, Adolph?
Sure, I try.
All right, why don't you do that?
Yep.
And I will try to keep our viewers entertained. So yes, so while we're here, we're going to talk about Adolph's piece, since that's what we're talking about. The whole country is a Reichstag. And the purpose of the piece, and I have it in front of me, is to basically talk about the dangers of the current political moment that we are in and what exactly that poses for American society. And in the piece, Adolph goes into a long kind of historical analysis of what the reactionary right has meant in terms of their strategic moving forward that starts, according to Adolph, with the rise of, in the 1964 election of, that basically started the Republican Party in this direction of becoming a reactionary right. So in the piece, Adolph is basically addressing what the path forward should be and exactly how, progressives or the left should react to this impending situation. So his argument is that the Goldwater election basically becomes the flashpoint moment upon which we find the rise of the iteration of today's contemporary reactionary right.
So there he is.
Yeah, or is this any better?
Yes.
Looks a little better so far.
Yes,
okay.
that is worlds better.
Good.
In your piece, you open up with the play, the Eugene Ionesco. Am I saying the name correctly? Ionesco play Rhinoceros.
Yeah, I think it's UNESCO, but I'm not sure.
UNESCO. Sorry, I know it's a French name. We should actually ask our French co-host to pronounce it properly.
Well, it's actually
Ionesco. I got to see the spelling again. I remember the.
But that play is about a small French town where the people in that town turn into rhinoceroses.
Right.
Everyone except for the main character. The play is supposed to be about growing fascism in the Europe before the rise, or during the rise of the Nazi Party and Mussolini in Italy. Would you say this quote best describes the American populace as a whole when it comes to a rise of fascist thought and behavior within the GOP?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I know it really describes the way I feel, right? So, like, I've been reading, but for what it's worth, I've been reading that play for solace for like 50 years, actually, right? No, I think a way to think about how it's happening here is, and I try to lay this out in the article too, is that there are a number of things going on, right? And that's what you'd expect to have happen in a big, pluralist society. There are some people who are committed ideologues who have wanted who have fantasized from the very beginning about a fascist dictatorship in the U.S., right? There are people who are just hustlers, right? And maybe, more or less venal, more or less psychotic hustlers, right? And it's hard to tell, which is which. But what makes this a movement is that they all have converged this one umbrella, and like every step, every move that they make politically is to undermine the idea of authority. So just take, for instance, one that's recent to me, the in those in those states that came into the U.S. from Hidalgo, call themselves who understand themselves, or who are basically another version of what 20 years ago, Posse Comitatus movement, right? People who insist that the highest political authority in the U.S. is the locally elected sheriff, and anti-vax, anti-masking movement. So all these forces are coming together around this objective of undermining the idea of authority and of the public. And so they come from McConnell destroyed democracy. They more set out them, right? Corporations and other rich people. But once you're on the ride, just take the ride and go where it goes. I don't think people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, or Lauren Boebert have sense to think about planning like to overthrow the government. But they're just doing what they do to build their brands, but to a chance. But it's all kind of leading them in that same direction, right? It means to say that this is a political movement and not just a group of idiosyncratic plotters and
Adolph, we're cutting off really, really, really bad again. I don't know if you can possibly go to audio only. I don't know what the situation is, but the internet connection on your end is really, really bad.
But well, so what do you suggest?
Is there I was going to say, is there, so let's actually there's no way you can go audio only. Let's keep trying again.
Well, is there a way, like what I see, I can disable the camera? I don't know if that'll do it.
Why don't you try that? Why don't you disable the camera and see if that's better?
All right.
There we go.
Okay. So what do you think? Does this seem any better?
Sounds a little clearer. Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. That's good. I don't need to look at myself.
There you go. So continue with your point. And what you're saying is that you're basically saying that the Republican Party is cohering around a certain politics that pretty much is destabilizing our traditional notions of democracy. And there's some versions of them that are true believers, and there are others that are just kind of grifters who are going along for the ride.
Right, that's right.
But your overall position is that distinguishing that from the other is irrelevant. The overall nature of the movement in itself is authoritarian and undemocratic. Is that basically your overall point?
Right, and that's also a reason that I, sort of don't get kind of frustrated with with leftists, and this is the kind of thing that leftists want to do, but who want to debate whether this is like National Socialism or like something else. That's not really the point, right? But the point is that they are committed to destruction of democratic institutions. And I often have put it this way. So it's like, what if we assume that neoliberalism has exhausted its capacities for giving enough to enough people in the population to legitimize or to maintain its legitimacy as a nominally democratic order? Well, if that's the case, then it's like we're at a T intersection, right? And there are two ways to go. You either turn right toward authoritarianism or turn left in the direction of social democracy. And there's no alternative. Now, it looks like the Democrats have been trying to split the difference, right? Between doing what they've been doing and making a genuine turn in the direction of social democracy. But it just seems to me there's only these two ways forward.
Well, that's really the crux of where I wanted to go with the conversation. I understand the argument, and I also agree with you that it's kind of a waste of time to try to debate the minutia of whether or not Trumpism is actually a legitimate fascist movement or not.
Right.
My only kind of retort, though, and by the way, I've used the metaphor as well. I did a show with Janice Graham where I said, a Black America in the age of the Weimar Republic. So, not to be hypocritical, I've used that metaphor as well. But the question is that if we argue that it's not significant to really, prove that Trump is a fascist or not, what is the value of myself, yourself, and others using the metaphor over and over again?
Well, but despite the reference to the Reichstag, right? I think fascism is itself a species of a genus of authoritarian government, right? And my concern is to sound the alarm about how, the danger, right, with the proximity of authoritarian government of whatever species, right? Like, it doesn't matter to me whether it's like, I don't know, chrome and leather and jackboots, right? And like S&M fashion or like something else. But the point is that we're in danger and in imminent danger, right, of losing whatever capacities we have remaining in this system to control or to limit, right, the actions of an aggressive and a bloodthirsty right wing, and that their intent on removing whatever institutional buttresses we might have to be able to contain them, right? Like, you look at the attacks on voting rights, right? You look at the attacks on public institutions across the board, all the crazy shit coming out of Texas and Florida, but elsewhere, as well, right? So it's not, and whether or not there's some guy sitting behind a curtain on a stool who's orchestrating all this isn't really the point, right? The point is that these relatively autonomous tendencies in the polity that are moving more or less in a concert under this big umbrella are moving in that direction. And frankly, I'll just preempt the question and say that the answer to the question of what we can do about this as a left is nothing, right? Because there is no left that has any political capacity whatsoever. So for all these people like in Jacobin and elsewhere who want to go on about how we ought to react to Biden and petitions that we ought to sign and the demands that we ought to make, is just whistling past the graveyard or indulging in some sort of fantasy, right? Because the real stakes in relation to the real stakes in American politics at this moment For for the left, it's a spectator sport, right? Because there's nothing we can do.
Well, one thing, a sentiment that we've often echoed on this show, and I've said it myself, is that there is no left; there are only leftists. So I'm glad to hear that you agree with that.
Right. Yep.
But at the same time, right, and what's kind of important for me, and I think you're aware of this, is I know you're aware of this because you allude to it in your piece, is that the rise of the reactionary right, even in its earliest 21st century iteration, is not an American phenomenon. It actually starts in Europe and other parts of the world before the rise of Trumpism. As a matter of fact, you can make the argument that the Trumpian manifestation of this global rightward shift is a much later fascination of the popularity of Marine Le Pen in France, of the rise of UKIP in Britain. You had, Viktor Orban in Hungary. You have, of course, even though he was kind of contemporary of Trump, you have Modi in India. You have Bolsonaro, which is a kind of Trump contemporary phenomenon. You had the Five Dawn that was in Greece, I believe, the Golden League. I think it was the Golden
Dawn in Greece,
Golden Dawn in Greece, and the Five League in Italy. Right. So if we realize that this is not only an exclusively American phenomenon, but a phenomenon that predates internal mechanisms of American politics, doesn't that require that we make our analysis much broader and wider in scope of what has actually happened than simply saying we have to narrow gaze what's going on in American politics in terms of asking what exactly is the crisis of the global post-World War II liberal democratic standard of governance has caused this?
Well, yeah, I think the response to that is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, since the 1970s, we've seen the right first in the U.S. and then elsewhere, or rather first in the U.S. and Britain and then elsewhere, intensify the regimes of a regressive redistribution, right? And what that requires is a combination of bullshitting people about how it's going to trickle down on them, right, or down to them, and it requires demonizing and repression of people who are defined as like the scapegoats, right? And that proceeds, right? But after a half century of this regime, what the numbers show it, almost daily, more and more people in this country, and it's also true in Western and Central Europe, but more and more people in this country have been feeling more and more insecure economically, right? Less in the way of options or imagined options that they have. Conditions of work have become more and more precarious. And what's happened is, and like the crises, right? Starting from the .com crisis, or maybe if you want, going back to the energy crisis, and certainly like the Great Recession, have only been occasions for the people at the top to intensify the pattern of upward of a regressive redistribution. More and more people find themselves getting the fuzzy end of the lollipop, and people aren't stupid. So what that means is confidence in government, confidence in the system is collapsing, right, around the world, almost on a daily basis, right? So in that context, that comes back to my earlier point that there are really only two ways forward, right? You either begin to restore confidence by moving in a social democratic direction that actually commits the national government to doing things to make people's lives better, or you go in the other direction and say, well, to hell with restoring confidence. Let's just put the jackboot down and get some scapegoats and keep, moving the target of the scapegoating around for as long as we need to, or for however it'll work. And that's the alternative, and that's the only alternative.
So I think where you and I agree here is that the basic current political crisis is rooted in a crisis of capitalism, starting with the shift to the neoliberal order, which was a bipartisan consensus in the United States and largely in the West, starting in the 70s. Some say with Nixon's kind of huggy kiss with Friedman, Milton Friedman. Others argue it really starts in 79 with the Volcker shock. But we do know that as a product of coming out of Bretton Woods, going to the gold standard,
Carter starts a lot of that deregulation as well.
Right. Yeah. Jimmy, don't forget that, man, because Jimmy Carter was a warm-up act, like for Ronald Reagan.
I mean, 79 is the first year that we really have some big-time deregulation when it comes to interest rates on credit cards and the limits that you can charge on interest rates. And that's during the Carter administration. And he actually, and Adolph actually points this out in the article, that Carter did campaign on the fact that he cut government in half in Georgia.
That's correct. That's correct. So
again, the Southern Democrats, Carter and Clinton, who come to power in the early 80s and of course in the 90s, are the ones that kind of echo the sentiment of the errors of big government.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, what's interesting though is that what you're saying, is that the only way to fight the coming of the reactionary right is with social democracy or a more left materialist agenda. Where I think you and I might kind of bump heads is that I am not convinced by any stretch of the imagination that the current Democratic Party and the liberals in America or globally are really serious about pivoting out of neoliberalism.
Well, I'll tell you what, Pascal, I'm not convinced either. But what I'll say is, what else you got? Right. I mean, that's
there's an intermediary.
And what might that be?
Keynesianism.
Well, yeah, yes. And that's what the BlackRock tendency, right, in the Biden administration has been advocating. And that's where our allies are. And see, once you start out from the assumption or the premise, right, that the left is no more than a spectator in setting the agenda, right? Then what that suggests is that where the standard bearer is for the vessel that in the short term is going to carry our hopes and dreams is in these Wall Street Keynesians who are in the Biden administration. And I know but people might want there to be something else, right? But there isn't anything else, and they might think that there's some, like Trotskyists like to think if we just call for the masses to rise, the masses will rise. But the only, two points. One, the Progressive Caucus in the House has had its finest hour, right? They've been extremely effective. They've been very well coordinated, and they've done what they can do, right, to push. To push a progressive agenda as far as it can go. But I think they also show, through no fault of their own, really, but also show the limits of an electoral approach to political change, right? Because now's the moment, right, when Manchin and Sinema, who are basically voices for outside interests, right? When they act as the voices of these mobilized outside interests, the only effective response from the Progressive Caucus would be to mobilize their popular constituencies out there to act collectively. Like I'm thinking about 1 million people on the 14th Street Bridge, but they don't have that kind of base, right? Because they've built what they have as a movement inside Congress through electoral mobilization. and they're good and smart and talented and have gone as far as they can go. But this is the moment when they would need to be able to bring external pressure to bear. And because of the nature of the movement that they've been part of, that external, they don't have the capacity to bring that external pressure to bear. So what can we do? I mean, at this point, the only thing that can be hoped for is that the Wall Street Keynesian element in the Biden administration will be able, in some way, like to circumvent Manchin and Sinema. That doesn't seem especially likely at this point.
Well, this is the thing, though. Let's define some of these terms, because people are asking a question like this super chat. What is neoliberalism according to Adolph Reed, other than the famous quote of his defeat of the working class?
Right. Yeah, that's it. That's all it is.
Well, I'd like, and you can kind of kick me in the teeth here if you disagree with my definition, Adolph. But I define neoliberalism as privatization or marketization, taking government functions and rendering it to the private sector while you still pay taxes, and gutting the functioning of the government and turning everything over to capital in terms of control.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's all part of it. I mean, those are instrumentalities of the term. But the real, but at the end of the day, and frankly, like I, kind of laid that out there after, getting overdosing on academics' taxonomic exercises in trying to parse what counts as neoliberalism and what doesn't. Right, just like it struck me as a version of the same thing as people who were trying to navigate their way around. Being in support of Caitlyn Jenner and being opposed to Rachel Dolezal by finding ways arbitrarily to assign what's authentically Black and what isn't, right? Because in both cases, like you get around to well, who says, right? And what makes this particular practice, right, fundamentally definitive of what neoliberalism is, right? Because sometimes it's about privatization, sometimes it's not. Right. I mean, sometimes it's about, or in some domains, it's about weakening the central authority or the authority of the central state. In some domains, it's about strengthening the authority of the central state. Right. So what? And like I won't, defend that characterization as the end-all be-all characterization of what neoliberalism is, because frankly, it's as much a quip as it is anything else. But I was also like reacting to the sense, and again, this is among academics principally, that neoliberalism is somehow something different from capitalism, and it's not. So my argument is fundamentally that neoliberalism is just capitalism that's eliminated any effective working class opposition.
Would you also say that there's kind of a bit of a consensus, maybe in the online world more than anywhere else, but there definitely is a bit of a consensus that the neoliberal project is strictly a Democratic Party project, which I don't agree with.
Oh, I don't agree with that at all.
Partisan.
Well, but to quote Dave Chappelle, the online world doesn't exist.
Shout out to This is Revolution podcast and all YouTube fans. Well, here's the thing, though, Adolph, and I'm going to, again, you might want to kick me in the teeth on this one too.
Yeah, no, we're all trying to keep it. I think we're all trying to get to the same place here. So,
well, let's take that. You said the online world is not real. Mm-hmm. Well, the online world does have a political effect. Hashtags are becoming politics.
In what sense, though? In what real sense?
Well, not in a good sense.
What hashtag is politic?
Okay, well, my question is this. When someone can create a hashtag like Black Lives Matter and get the left flank of capital to get them serious, to consider them serious enough to change the framing of how they think policy demands should be made and fund them, is that not politics?
I mean, we're about to do a whole show on how all that rhetoric didn't work in Minneapolis,
Right.
where it really starts at.
Yep.
Well, I didn't say it was
happened
good.
you live in Florida right now. Has Stand Your Ground been repealed?
No. Hold on.
Then what did it do?
I'm not saying it's good or effective politics. That doesn't mean it's not real politics.
I mean, it worked people up enough to complain on a certain level. Like Ford Motors is going to make commercials about it, but is policy going to change? You're going to put George Floyd's name on a crime bill, but that crime bill it was a horrible bill that had more funding for police in it. It was literally the antithesis of the defund the police movement.
Yeah, but my position is
if a hashtag is anything, it's style over substance.
Yeah.
And if that's trending, I'll take what's trending and I'll throw it on a bill if that shuts you up and lets people hashtag they won.
Right.
So what does hashtagging really do? And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is coming from the music world. One thing we always said was likes and followers aren't record sales. It's a very empty thing to do.
Yeah.
Click like, click follow, hell, even click subscribe when we ask you to. Doesn't necessarily mean we have 6,700 subscribers. There's not 6,700 people watching this. That's my point about the internet. It's real, but how real is it when it comes to a real movement? Force the Vote is another great example. That was all about politics. How many people really came out to those marches?
Yeah.
My position, again, I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of the effective nature of those things, but we've had symbolic and ineffective aspects of things that we know exist in Black politics that weren't hashtags that actually had less political effect than some of these hashtags.
Again,
well, I guess one question.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, sorry, but I guess one question concerns how you measure political effects, right?
Thank you.
You know, what counts as a political effect, right? Is because people are talking about it criterion, right? That I think people often kind of recur to, right? I mean, I can't remember what I might have mentioned this on a show once before, but during the height of Occupy, I had back-to-back lunches with two progressive colleagues of mine in the Penn History Department, and each conversation is weird. Each conversation went exactly the same way. That the colleague says something about you're feeling good about Occupy, and I said, well, why exactly? And the colleague says, and in each case it was exactly the same, but the colleague says, well, because it's got people talking about inequality. And I said, in each case, who do you know who's talking about inequality now who wasn't talking about inequality 6 weeks ago, or like, right? What I mean, before Occupy. In each case, the response was, after a little pause, the New York Times. And in each case, I responded by saying, well, okay. 3 months ago, the New York Times is talking about Kim Kardashian's breakup with the basketball player, right? So what does that tell you?
It's what's interesting is, and I'll pose this point. When COVID first happened, it wasn't a hashtag that got Gavin Newsom to move to enact Operation Roomkey. It was actual on the ground activists that have been working for some time to push him to do that. That wasn't started by a hashtag.
Well, I can tell you one thing. If we want to agree that the hashtag phenomenon or the online political world is not effective or may not be considered politics because it's lack of effect or stylistic nature, one of the things that it has been effective in doing is increasing the effectiveness of our political opponents, i.e. the right, to use those phenomenon, categorize any political project to their left as being outside of the sorts
Right.
of the American people. So even though we may argue that Black Lives Matter, quote unquote, hashtag has no value as a political project for us per se, if you want to make that argument, we definitely know that it's an organizing principle being used by the reactionary right.
Well, wait. Yeah, wait.
Did we just lose?
Are you there, Adolph? Because you broke up on us.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I said I want to suggest a series of that view. Right?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay.
It's like you're cutting out again.
Huh, well, it's weird. All right.
That's the deep state. Don't worry. That's all that is.
Oh, okay. But so here's the thing, right? Like, I look at this movement from kind of different perspective, right? Because after.
Let me get off the screen.
What? Again? Am I lost again?
We broke up a little bit. Well, go ahead. Wow, you're breaking up really bad.
Wow. Okay. Well.
Go ahead. Can you continue?
Yeah, sure. But the right went underground basically, right? Because they realized that they'd made their move too soon, and they began organizing in their base levels, right? In white suburbs basically, and field testing messages and bundling them. They've built that movement, right? Like
You're breaking up. Adolph, do you see the message inside the chat?
Yeah.
Can you follow those instructions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties, folk, with Adolph's internet. Just give us a couple of seconds. We're going to try to work this out.
Can you hear us, Adolph?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, loud and clear. Can you hear him, Pascal?
We can hear him fine. Thank you.
Okay. You might hear my phone alerts go off, so just ignore it. Just ignore the Tinder.
Right. Okay.
All right, so Adolph, you were basically refuting my point that if we're going to agree that the hashtags don't work for our politics, they're definitely becoming an organizing principle for our political opponents, which is the reactionary right. So you were going to frame your rebuttal to that point.
Right, which is that I go back to the Goldwater defeat, right? And after Goldwater was defeated in '64 ignominiously, the hard or the ultra right. They retreated, right? In the principle of a guerrilla strategy, to start cultivating a base for themselves, right? Like in what they perceive to be a natural constituency of white suburbs, and field testing messages. It that opposition to abortion became a fault line, right? And the Reagan natural, right, in the sense that it was made up largely of holy roller
who were
a
lot of feedback now.
Don't keep talking.
Deep state is hitting us from all angles tonight, folks. The deep state is hitting us from all angles.
Yeah.
So, like, are you hearing the feedback too, man?
I heard it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, like, should we just bag this and try for another time or what?
This is, we're already on the first hour, coming to up on the first hour. This is, let me see what Jason wants to do here. Yeah, Adolph, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna try to reschedule this, man, because we've never had a show with this much technical difficulty.
Wow. Okay.
So, folks, we are at the end of the hour, but we're going to try to reschedule Adolph sometime, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. to continue this conversation. We could not control the technical difficulty. It was not on my part or our part or even Adolph's. It was something outside of our control. But Adolph, I really want to thank you for coming on and trying to hash this out. We were really coming to the best parts of the conversation. But I hope you'd be willing to come back and have us reschedule this and do this another time.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I'll do it.
All right. On that note, folks, Saturday we're going to be having a show on Is America in Decline overall? We're going to have Daniel Bessner and his crew. So come check us out as well. Hopefully we won't be having the technical difficulties we're having right now. And besides that, I think on that note, we will wrap up the show. And we will try to reschedule this and redo this sometime soon. So I will turn this over to Jason, and I think that we are going to